In 2006, the incredibly popular show Dexter began airing, a show starring Michael C. Hall, which featured a forensic technician working for the Miami Police Department that helped them solve crimes and catch killers, while also doubling as a vigilante serial killer who hunted down murderers. The show would gain considerable amounts of fame and go on to air for another 7 years. However, unbeknownst to the creators behind the show, it was also slowly but surely inspiring a no-name independent director to indulge in his darkest desires. In today's video, we'll be diving into the story of Mark Twitchell, a would-be serial killer inspired by Dexter who planned on writing a story about his own murders. Mark Twitchell was born July 4, 1979 in Edmonton, Alberta. His childhood was average by all accounts, and he came from a very well-adjusted family. But from a young age, Mark developed a love for films that quickly grew into an urge to create films himself. In his early adulthood, Mark attended the Northern Alberta Institute of Technology and graduated from their radio and television arts program in 2000. Students who knew him at the time later reported that he was a loner type during school. However, he did have a small group of friends, one of whom was a man named Drew Kenworthy. According to later interviews with Drew, Mark seemed like a fine guy, but he didn't trust him. Mark was apparently a horrible classmate who repeatedly failed to do his part when it came to group projects, and would also frequently lie, a trait that would show up again later in his interviews with police. The year after he graduated, Mark met and married an American woman. However, the marriage would fail, and the two would get divorced by 2004. Following his divorce, Mark began to dive into the world of independent filmmaking. In 2007, Mark directed a full-length Star Wars fan film entitled Star Wars Secrets of the Rebellion, and even featured a cameo from Jeremy Bulloch, whom hardcore Star Wars fans will know as the actor that played Boba Fett. According to those who worked with Mark on set, it truly seemed like a real functioning Hollywood set, with many believing that Mark could possibly have a real chance at a future in the filmmaking industry. The movie entered post-production but was never released, as well as Mark's next film, Day Players, which was financed but never filmed or finished. After becoming an extreme fan of the Dexter TV show in the summer of 2008, Mark wrote, directed, and produced an 8-minute short horror film titled House of Cards, which featured a killer who lures a man off an online dating site in order to kill him in a garage, a description which will sound incredibly familiar in a moment. Following the creation of this horror short film, Mark decided he wanted to try the real thing, and became a serial killer like Dexter. He started an account on an online dating website called Plenty of Fish, and pretended to be a woman named Sheena with the intention of catfishing and luring guys to his garage where he planned on brutally murdering them. Mark's first target was a man named Giles Tetreault, and after chatting him up for a bit on a dating app, Mark was able to convince Giles to come pick him up for a date on the 3rd of October 2008. Giles arrived at the house and approached the garage in search of Sheena, as he had been instructed to do previously. However, when he arrived inside the garage, he didn't find Sheena, but instead was attacked by Mark wearing a hockey mask and was bludgeoned with a stun baton. Mark was able to blindfold Giles. However, running on pure adrenaline, Giles was able to break free of Mark's grasp and make an escape. Unfortunately, the hits from the stun baton had made it difficult to control his legs, and he struggled to run away fast. Instead, Giles chose to call out for help and get the attention of strangers, at which point Mark decided the best course of action was to pretend that all of this was a big game and claimed that he was just playing around. This excuse didn't exactly sell, however this did allow for Giles to get into his car and leave with his life intact. According to a book that Giles would go on to write entitled The One That Got Away, he didn't report this incident to police because Mark threatened to come back and finish the job if he did. Thus, the crime went unreported and Mark was free to try his devious plan again. Exactly a week after the failed attack, Sheena convinced another man to come by the garage to meet her. This time, the prospective victim was 38-year-old John Brian Johnny Altinger. Unlike with Giles, Johnny was somewhat nervous to meet an internet stranger in real life, and so he made sure to tell some friends that he was going to meet up with a woman he'd been talking to online, telling them, "She's home now, I'm heading over again, hee hee." Johnny arrived at the house and texted Mark to let him know and received a text informing him that his date was waiting for him in the garage. When Johnny entered the garage, he was met with a sight straight out of a horror movie. The garage was dark, with a large and heavy metal table the size of a pool table set up in the center of the room. Covering the table as well as the entire room, there were large plastic semi-transparent plastic sheets which were there to catch any blood spatter. Similarly to Giles, Mark ambushed Johnny once he was inside the garage, this time choosing to bludgeon him with a heavy metal pipe. Johnny writhed in agony and begged Mark to spare him, offering him money and silence in exchange for his life. Mark baited Johnny into thinking he was going to let him go, before cruelly stabbing him in the gut with a hunting knife. He then sliced open Johnny's jugular and let him bleed to death on the garage floor. away from the plastic sheeting he had put up, letting blood pool and smear on the garage floor. After Johnny's death, Mark hefted him up onto the metal table before grabbing a processing kit, which included a butcher's knife, a fillet knife, a skinner, and a serrated saw. Mark proceeded to cut Johnny's legs off at the knees, decapitate his head, cut his torso in two at the diaphragm, and sliced off his arms at the elbow. The body parts were then thrown into bags and eventually placed into drums at a later date, which were eventually lit on fire. This method of disposal was insufficient for Mark, and he decided to cut up Johnny's remains into little pieces with the intention of dumping them into a river. Mark returned the next day and slowly and methodically shaved pieces of flesh off of Johnny's severed limbs, before knocking out the teeth on the decapitated skull to try and avoid dental recognition. He then finally drove the pieces to a bridge and chucked them into the river. In an attempt to cover up Johnny's mysterious disappearance, Mark pretended to be Johnny and sent an email to Johnny's friends, which read, "Hey there, I've met an extraordinary woman named Jen who has offered to take me on a nice long tropical vacation. We'll be staying in her winter home in Costa Rica. Phone number to follow soon. I won't be back in town until December 10th, but I will be checking my email periodically. See you around the holidays, Johnny." This email was incredibly suspicious, and Johnny's friends were instantly concerned the moment they read it, as not only did it not sound like their friend's writing, it was also an extremely rash and illogical thing for him to do. Mark also sent a similarly weird and vague email of resignation to Johnny's job. However, Johnny obviously failed to pick up his final paycheck, which led to further suspicions. With Johnny's friends and family becoming extremely worried for him, they decided to break into his apartment. It was there that they found not only that he had left dirty dishes in the sink, left his passport, and hadn't packed at all for the several-month trip he was supposedly taking. The police were soon involved, and they were able to track down Johnny's connection with Mark easily, as Johnny had sent one of his friends the exact address of where he was going. When the police arrived to question Mark, he attempted to play dumb, saying that he had no idea who Johnny Altinger was. However, this bluff was easily seen through, and he was swiftly placed under custody on October 31st, 2008. Alongside their interrogations of Mark, the police also searched through his belongings and found a 43-page document on Mark's computer titled SK Confessions, or Serial Killer Confessions, which was a detailed story Mark was writing on his fall into madness and depravity. In the disturbing document, he went into excruciating detail about how he lured, killed, and disposed of Johnny. The document began with, "This story is based on true events. The names and events were altered slightly to protect the guilty. This is the story of my progression into becoming a serial killer." While this sentence alone seems like it would be enough to incriminate someone, it got worse the farther in Mark wrote. At one point, he even went into detail about how he had played with Johnny's decapitated head before knocking out the teeth, moving his mouth and making voices to make it seem like Johnny was talking. With the evidence stacked up against him, it was no surprise when Mark was convicted of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 25 years on April 12, 2011. Around 3 years after his initial arrest, the police eventually learned about the attempted murder of Giles Tetreault, and Mark was tried for an attempted murder charge. However, since Mark had already been given the maximum sentence for his first-degree murder charge, the charge was dropped. Mark has since spent his life behind bars. However, he did make a statement sometime later, telling everyone that while in prison, he caught up on all the Dexter episodes he had missed. What are your thoughts about this case? Be sure to let us know down in the comment section below, and be sure to tell us about any other cases you'd like us to cover in future videos.